It has been a minute since I've done a rifle review, but we are back with another one. This is the Bergara B-14 Wilderness Sierra bolt action rifle. And this is chambered in 270 Winchester. And there's a lot of reasons why I am really fond of this rifle. One is the price point. It comes in right around that $1,000 price point, which I think is very approachable for the vast majority of people. My previous rifle review videos, I've started kind of at the budget version around like that Ruger American CVA Cascade type level, but now we're taking a step up in price point and we're starting to look at that band of $1,000 rifle range. And this rifle, again, the Bergara Wilderness Sierra, falls in right around that price point. And the real question is, does this rifle warrant the couple $100 increase over, say, a Ruger American Gen 2 or the CVA Cascade, in which both of those rifles I have reviewed in the past? So does this Wilderness Sierra from Bergara warrant that upgrade in price? Let's talk about some overview and some of my first initial impressions about this rifle. The most obvious one is this piece right here. This is an adjustable cheek piece that comes standard with the factory stock, and all you do is rotate this little screw right here counterclockwise to loosen it so you can adjust it up and down, and then go clockwise to tighten it and set it at the right height that you want. What this allows is it allows a much more comfortable positioning of your neck and your head when you're looking through the scope so that there's no neck strain. Now, even though I wouldn't deem an adjustable cheek piece a necessity when it comes to a hunting rifle, it is extremely nice to have, because to me personally, I'm just that much more comfortable when I am shouldering the rifle and looking through the scope ready to take a shot. So that's the first one. The other one is the overall feel of the stock. This stock is very rigid and very sturdy. You can't really like push any piece of the stock where it'll show some kind of flex. It's just a really good stock, speaking from a factory stock perspective. On top of that, it's got a nice paint job. I like the paint job. And if you've ever felt any Bergara rifle, it has a pretty tacky, somewhat rubber feel to it, which allows for very nice grip on the rifle. Again, is it the best in the world? No, but for a factory stock, I think that I don't really have anything to complain about, because there are some other rifles around this price point where they don't have as good of a stock as this Bergara. The third one is the bolt itself. This bolt is fairly smooth for factory rifle. Really no issues there. It's also got an oversized bolt handle here, so when you go to work the action, it's extremely easy to pick up and use. Next, we talk about the trigger, because for a factory trigger, this Bergara, it comes in right around 2 pounds, which I think that's the sweet spot for pretty much all of my hunting rifles. And the fact that I don't have to do any messing around with this factory trigger here, it's a plus, because you can just buy off the shelf and don't have to worry about it. This rifle is Cerakoted, so the barrel is Cerakoted, so you don't have to worry as much about your barrel rusting, because it is not a blued barrel. Last, it does come threaded 5/8 by 24, and it comes with a radial muzzle brake, which a radial muzzle brake is not really anything too special, but I do like that it comes with it. So if you don't want the muzzle brake, you can just take it off. So one of those situations where it's good to have it and not need it, as opposed to want it or need it and not have it. So because it's 5/8 by 24 thread, you can take off this radial muzzle brake, put a side port muzzle brake on, or put a suppressor on, depending on your choice of a muzzle accessory there. One of the downfall right off the get-go compared to other options or competitors around the price point is this rifle is a little bit on the heavier side of things. It's not overly heavy, but comparing it to like a Tikka T3X or a Browning X-Bolt, all around that $1,000 price point, this rifle is a little bit on the heavier side, but it's not really anything that I would deem a deal breaker when it comes to choosing between the options around that price point. So when I approached this particular rifle, I went in with the mindset of a brand new hunter, where you have no other hunting rifles. You are looking to purchase your first and perhaps only hunting rifle that you will want or need for the time being. So with that said, when it came to the cartridge, I opted for a 270 Winchester because the 270 Winchester, you can find ammo pretty much anywhere. And not only can you find ammo almost anywhere, they're also cheaper, less expensive, that's a better term, less expensive than say some of the newer cartridges like a 7 PRC or a 6.5 PRC. So it's readily available in terms of ammunition, and each box of ammunition is generally less expensive than some of the newer cartridges out there. Ballistically, if you look at the 270 and the ranges that most people should be shooting anyway, the 270 can do it all. And I wouldn't hesitate using a 270 Winchester on game such as elk and even moose. That's why I opted for a 270 Winchester. When it comes to choosing one rifle to do it all, whether it's your first rifle ever or just another backup rifle, I tend to push them towards the tried and true cartridges, your 30-06, your 270 Winchester, your 308 Winchester, because you don't have to worry about not finding ammo for it. You can have the most bougie rifle in the world, but if you can't find ammunition for it, you're not shooting anything with it. That's why I opted for a 270 Winchester. Now, let's talk about how I set up the rifle. So the first thing that I do when it comes to setting up a new rifle is I make sure that everything is secured together properly. You essentially have two main things that you have to worry about. You have these two bottom screws right here that secures the stock to the barrel to action, and in some cases, some rifles come with a Picatinny rail, and so I go ahead and unscrew all the screws if it has a Picatinny rail and remove the Picatinny rail, and then I remove these two bottom screws down here, and then I screw these screws back in at 45 inch-pounds to make sure that one of these screws or both of these screws are not loose, because if your screws are loose and when you go to shoot, that's going to lead into some variability in your grouping process, which can just create a lot of headache. So that's the first thing that I do. Once I have the stock re-secured to the barrel to action, the next step is to secure our rifle to a gun vise. In this case, I'm using a Tipton gun vise because this is the one I have used for many years and it has served me well. The next step is to clean the barrel. The cleaning process in this beginning stage is for two primary reasons. It's to, one, remove any excess fouling that the barrel might have from the factory or during shipment, or you don't know where the rifle's been. So you just want to make sure that you're cleaning any excess fouling. And then second, you just want to make sure that there's no big blockage in the barrel, which can cause a very dangerous situation when you go to shoot your rifle and there's something actually blocking the bullet's line of path. So how I clean the barrel is I simply take a white patch and I soak it in bore cleaner, and I run that bore cleaner patch through the barrel one time and I let it sit for about 15 minutes. After about 15 minutes, I use some dry white patches and I simply run it through the barrel until the white patches are clean. And depending on how clean or dirty the barrel is, you might have to repeat this process a few times, but since this rifle was brand new, all it took was one time with a bore cleaner and then a few white patches and I was good to go. So all I'm looking for is just a white patch that's not extremely dirty by the time you're done cleaning it. Once I'm done with this gun bore cleaner process, the last thing I do is I run another white patch, but this time I use lubricating oil and I run that lubricated oil patch through the barrel one time, and that's my barrel cleaning process for the beginning stages. After the barrel cleaning process, now I go to the exterior of the rifle and I simply wipe down the gun with some gun oil, and once I'm done with that, I just wipe off any excess gun oil that might be dripping off. When done, I replace my Picatinny rail on the receiver and prepare my torque wrench. Vortex Optics recently just released their own torque wrench, which I love because of the fine detailing and markings of what weight your torque wrench is at. So in the past, I have used the Wheeler Engineering torque wrench and it has served me well. But the problem with the Wheeler Engineering one is that the weight marking on the Wheeler is not as precise as the new one that Vortex just released. So this makes it really hard to set the weight back to the same exact weight on the Wheeler Engineering one if you missed one screw on a specific set of screws. Since the Vortex is very precise with the markings, you can go back to any screw you missed and reset the weight to what the rest of the screws are at and properly torque the remaining or missing screw in place with the others. Back to the rifle setup. For the Picatinny rail, I use Loctite 242 on each screw and I set my torque wrench to 20 inch-pounds, then screw the Picatinny rail onto the receiver. After attaching the Picatinny rail, we need to level our rifle, so I used the Wheeler Engineering leveling kit. It's a two-piece kit where you have a barrel clamp and a reference level. To properly level the rifle in this case, we find the flattest spot on the rifle. For this particular setup, the most easily accessible and level spot would be the Picatinny rail that we just installed. Simply place the reference level on the Picatinny rail. Once the reference level is on the rail, rotate your rifle in the gun vise until that reference level is centered. If needed, loosen the gun vise so that you can rotate the rifle. When centered, resecure the rifle to the gun vise. With our reference level in place, the next step is to secure the barrel clamp level to the barrel. Because we know that your rifle is leveled with the reference level, simply adjust the barrel clamp level so that it is also centered like the reference level. Both the barrel clamp and reference level should have the bubble in the center. When this process is done, we can now remove the reference level because the barrel clamp is secured on our rifle, and we will use that as our new reference as we continue to set up the rifle. The next step is to prepare our rings. When it comes to rifle scope rings, there are three main things that you need to look for: base type, ring height, and tube diameter. The base type matters because, for example, a Picatinny scope ring will not fit on a dovetail. If you are using a Picatinny rail like I am here, you need to ensure that the rings that you purchased are designed to fit a Picatinny rail. The ring height matters because if your rings are too low, the objective of your scope will touch the barrel of your rifle, which will lead to issues. The only point of contact that your rifle scope should have with your rifle is through the scope rings only. The bigger your objective of your scope, the taller the rings you will need. The tube diameter matters because different scopes come in different sizes. For instance, the most common rifle scope tube sizes are 1 inch, 30 millimeter, and 34 millimeter. If your scope has a 1 inch main tube, but you purchased rings designed for a 30 millimeter main tube, they simply will not fit. Make sure that your rings match the exact tube diameter of your scope. If you have a 30 millimeter main tube on your scope, make sure that your rings are also designed for a 30 millimeter main tube. For this particular rifle, I went with the Vortex Pro Series rings, and these rings are the low height and the 30 millimeter tube. I went with these rings because the rifle scope that I chose, which is the Vortex Razor LHT 3-15x42, has a smaller objective lens at 42 millimeters and has a main tube of 30 millimeters. Now back to the setup, I temporarily screwed the two rings onto the Picatinny rail for a starting point. Both rings are hand tightened just so that they don't move around while I prepare for the next stage. Once the base of the rings are temporarily secured to the Picatinny rail, I remove the top pieces of the rings and place them aside. After this, I wipe down the interior of the rings. One thing that people do is they lap their rings, which when you lap your rings, it essentially creates a more even and consistent point of contact between the scope and the rings, which can help lead to better accuracy. For this project, like most of my other hunting rifles, I'm skipping the lapping process. The higher the quality of the rings, generally speaking, you don't have to worry about lapping your rings. We move on to the rifle scope itself, which the first thing I do is determine how much room I have to play with on the main tube. Different scopes have different tube lengths, which that can dictate how far or how close you can have your scope to your eye. With where I initially placed the scope rings, I can see that I have over an inch of space remaining on the front portion of the main tube. Having extra room is necessary because we first have to check for eye relief. Eye relief is the distance that your eye must be from the ocular lens or the rear lens of your rifle scope in order for you to see a full and clear picture. There should be no vignetting or black shadows around the edges of the scope. If there are shadows around the edges of the scope, that means that your scope is either too far forward or too far backward. How I check for eye relief is I close my eyes and I shoulder the rifle like I normally do when preparing for a shot. Once I am in a comfortable shooting position, I open my eye and look through the scope. Again, there should be no vignetting if the scope is at the right position for me. If there is vignetting, move the scope forward or backward until the vignette is gone. Repeat this process until you have achieved proper eye relief. After you have determined your eye relief, keep mental or some kind of note of where the scope needs to be. Now, I remove the scope and readjust the bases of my scope rings. I always position my rings as far away apart as possible from each other because physically speaking, that provides the most stability as opposed to having your rings closer together. This is not necessary, but this is just how I like to do things. Once I have the ring's final position in place, I attach my bubble level to the main tube of my rifle scope. For this accessory, I use the Vortex Low Pro bubble level, which, like the scope rings, the bubble level must match the tube diameter of the scope. So this Low Pro bubble level is also a 30mm diameter. I attach this level to the front end of the main scope tube, but I won't level it just yet. We simply need to attach it on at this step because it is extremely difficult to attach this level to the scope once the rifle scope is mounted on the scope rings. Just hand tighten the Low Pro bubble level for now. Next, I set my Vortex torque wrench to 30 inch-pounds and screw the base of the rings to the Picatinny rail. Now the next step is to secure the scope to the rings. So place your scope back on the bottom bases of the rings and then replace the top pieces of the scope rings to its corresponding part. I reset my torque wrench to 14 inch-pounds. Replace the reference bubble level to the top of the elevation turret. For this step, you can remove the cap of the elevation turret if you like, but I don't with this particular rifle scope because I have found no difference in the levelness of the scope. But of course, this varies depending on what scope you have. Next, recheck your barrel clamp level to make sure that the rifle is still leveled. Once that rifle is centered, we simply rotate our rifle scope until the reference level on the rifle scope matches the barrel clamp. Once leveled, I put Loctite 242 on each of the screws on the top piece of the scope rings and carefully screw the top piece rings to the bottom. I use an X pattern to avoid over tightening one side. You want the space between the top and bottom pieces of the rings to be as even as possible. While doing this process, always be checking and ensuring that the rifle scope is still level with the rifle itself. Once attached, wipe off any excess Loctite 242. Repeat this process to the other scope ring. Once we have secured the scope with the rings, the last step is to now level the Low Pro bubble level that is attached to the main tube of the scope to the barrel clamp and the reference level. Rotate the Low Pro level and hand tighten until it is level with the barrel clamp and the reference level. This may take a bit of time and trial and error, so don't rush through this step. For most rifles, this is where the setup process ends, but for the Bergara, because it has an adjustable cheek piece, another step for me is to adjust the cheek piece. With this, simply loosen the screw on the stock and adjust the height of the cheek riser until you have a comfortable fit. I am looking for a position where my head is comfortably resting on the cheek piece and I can see a full and clear picture through the scope without any neck strain. When that position is found, tighten the screw to secure the cheek riser in place. Next, I'm going to put the sunshade to the objective of my rifle scope because it will help with sun glare in certain shooting situations. Almost all scopes come with this optional accessory. It is not necessary, but I think the benefit is worth the extra ounce or two on your rifle. Last, I'm attaching a Kestrel Glassing Systems throw lever to the power ring to help aid with zooming in and out of the scope. And that is how I set up this rifle and the majority of my hunting rifles. Now that our rifle is set up, we're here at a gravel pit and this is where I'm gonna do my load testing. I have not shot this rifle, and one thing that you can do is you do this process called Boresighting, meaning what you do is you remove the bolt of this rifle. I can't remove it because of this cheek piece, but you remove the bolt of the rifle and then you put your rifle in a gun vise or something where your rifle's not moving, and you simply line your barrel up to an object in the distance, preferably about 50 yards. And then once you have that barrel squared with the said object at distance, you can go ahead and adjust your scope so that the middle of your crosshair somewhat lines up with the object that your barrel is pointing at. If you do it that way, then when you go to shoot your rifle, you should be theoretically somewhere close to on paper target. I have not done that, and because of the fact that this is adjusted and this is high, I can't remove my bolt. So I have placed a target box with a red circle in the middle at 50 yards instead of 100 yards. We're gonna start at 50 because even if my scope in my barrel or my gun is severely off, hopefully at 50 yards, that's enough time to catch the bullet in flight and let me know whether I'm shooting high, low, left, or right. So with that said, I want to run through all of the ammunition that I'm going to shoot or test in this rifle. So all of the loads in my hands are shooting monolithic projectiles, copper bullets. And the reason why I'm shooting monolithic bullets or testing only monolithic bullets with my Bergara is because I want this rifle to be California hunt ready. California legally requires hunters to use non-lead bullets, meaning bullets that have no lead in it. And these right here meet the requirements. So hunting in California, you're limited to monolithic bullets, which I have a handful of right here. So I have the Sig Sauer, the Barnes LRX, the Barnes TTSX, the Nosler E-tip, the Barnes TSX, loaded by Federal, the Federal Trophy Copper, as well as the Hornady CX bullet. So I have 7 different loads that I'm gonna shoot out of this Bergara. But because those are my precious hunting grade ammo, I also purchased these Federal Power Shock 270 130 grain projectiles, and these are cheap. I got these boxes of ammo for $24 a piece. That's right, I've got 2 of these boxes of ammo essentially for the price of 1 of these. And the reason why, when it comes to just bore sighting and, you know, getting used to the rifle, I use cheap ammo because that's all you're trying to do. You're just trying to get your rifle to shoot on paper, as well as you getting used to the rifle. So I don't burn my expensive ammo doing that process. These ammo, my hunting grade ammo, are strictly for dialing in my rifle and seeing what shoots best. So with that said, we're gonna use these to bore sight my rifle, and we'll go on from there. When it comes to sighting in your rifle or practicing with your rifle, many people set themselves up at a disadvantage from the get-go. What do I mean by that? I mean that they put themselves in a situation where they're not steady. So they'll go out there and they won't have a good rest for the front and the rear. And when you set yourself up at a disadvantage like that, you don't really know how truly good your rifle can shoot, as well as yourself. If you have any type of wobble, like, it's gonna throw your gun off. And one, that's gonna prevent you from having a true zero, like a really good zero, where your gun and your scope are hitting exactly where you're aiming. And you just don't know what loads are actually grouping well. So what I have here is not the best, but it's worked relatively well for me. So I have a pad down here simply because I'm shooting down, but I need my rifle to be raised. So I have a foam pad on the bottom down here. It's pretty sturdy. And then I have a sandbag for my front, and then I have a rear sandbag for the butt of my rifle. And you can see right now the rifle is sitting still, and with sandbags, like, you can really mold your rifle to the position you want, and then you're a lot more stable that way. Also, don't forget your ear protection, especially if you're shooting a muzzle brake. Muzzle brakes are really loud. If you're shooting a suppressor, that's okay. But again, this is a California rifle, and California does not allow suppressors to be used. So we have to use a muzzle brake, or we can take it off. But I'm gonna use the muzzle brake to reduce some of the recoil. So with that said, I'm gonna throw my protection into my ears here. And again, I have not bore sighted this at all. So I don't even know if I'm gonna hit that box at all. So start with some cheap Federal Power Shock. And then one thing you always want to do too is, even though the box says 270 Winchester, every time you pick out a round, make sure that it actually says 270 on here, because it's rare, but there are instances where people go to buy 270 ammo and they pull out a 30-06 round, and that's a recipe for disaster. So the rifle is chambered in 270 Winchester. I got a 270 Winchester round in my hand. We're gonna single feed these, and first impression with feeding, that fed flawlessly. So with that said, let's get ready to shoot here. So I'm gonna change my parallax down to 50, and then I'm gonna zoom in here. All right, and then get extra comfortable here. All right, here we go. Aiming for the dead center of that box. That trigger is extremely nice. It kind of caught me off guard, if I had to be honest, but I don't even think I'm on paper or on the box. Or so I don't think. Yeah, I'm not even on paper. This is why bore sighting it will help you yield, but I'm gonna just try and see where I hit. Just try to follow through. I think I'm hitting really high, like above the box. So I need to go down. So going up is this turret up here, but we need to go down. So I'm gonna go down 1 full revolution, back down to 0. And we'll see if that's right. Because I did not do what I told you guys to do and boresight it, one of my shots hit right here. This is my second shot, which I knew it hit low because my box is right there. And it was also shooting to the right. So I did a massive adjustment. I just shot again and we are on the box. So we don't need it to be exactly in the middle. We just want to be somewhat close to the red. So I'm about 2.5 inches to the right and then about 4 inches high at 50 yards. So we're gonna go back and adjust it and hopefully our next shot is somewhere on the red. So when it comes to dialing, there's 2 types of scopes. There's MOA, like my scope here, and there's mils. So with my scope, this scope is in MOA, which for beginners, you can essentially take MOA as inches. 1 MOA is not exactly 1 inch, but for starters, it's close enough that I wouldn't worry about it. So what that means is at 100 yards, if we click to the right or up 1 time, that means that at 100 yards, our reticle moved 1/4 of an inch up or down, depending on what direction. So that means that in order for us to move 1 inch at 100 yards, we will need to go 4 clicks. So this is 0.25 inches, 0.5 inch, 0.75 inch, 1 inch. But because we are sighting in at 50 yards for right now, everything has to double. So 4 clicks at 100 yards is 1 inch, but 4 clicks at 50 yards is only 1/2 inch. So with that said, we're gonna fix our elevation. So this top turret, this adjusts your up and down. This right turret adjusts your left and right. So we need to go down about 4 inches at 50 yards. So again, everything is doubled at 50 yards as opposed to 100 yards. So I need to go down. So up is this way, but we need to go down. So normally 4 inches at 100 yards is about 16 clicks, but because we're at 50 yards, we're gonna need to go 32 clicks. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. Pop that down. And now we need to go to our windage turret over here, and we need to go to the left 2.5 inches, which again, 2.5 inches at 100 yards would be about 10 clicks. But because we're at 50 yards, we need to double that. So 10 clicks at 100 yards means we need to go 20 clicks at 50 yards, and we need to go left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Now, if I did it right, we should be close to that red. There we go. That was the first shot on the box. I adjusted and we went to the bottom left. So I'm gonna go 4 clicks up and 4 clicks to the right, and then we're gonna bring it out to 100 yards. So we need to go up about 1/2 inch if I had to guess. So we're gonna go up 4 clicks. 1, 2, 3, 4, call that good. And then we need to go to the right. So we'll go 4 clicks to the right. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we should be good to go out to 100 yards. Target is now at 100 yards. We're just gonna shoot 1 time to make sure that it actually is hitting somewhat close to it. And then once we're there, we can start our grouping process with the actual hunting grade ammunition. We'll call that good, touching red. Now that we have our rifle scope and our rifle somewhat lined up, we're gonna call it good, and now we're gonna start our load testing process. But before we get to that, we wanna let our barrel cool down, and then we'll start our grouping process. One thing that is very useful for range time, both shooting at 100 yards and even plinking out to many hundred yards is a spotting scope. This is the Vortex Razor 27 to 60 by 85. And because of the 60 power, I can really zoom in tight and see where I'm hitting on the target. Not only that, I also have this all-in digiscoping adapter where you have this eyepiece attached to your spotting scope. And then I have a phone case where I can simply magnet my phone, and my phone now can film through the spotting scope, so I can both see my shots real time because I'm recording it on both my zeroing shots as well as shooting at steel plates at 400 or 500 yards, etc. That's something that's very useful, and I have it just with a tripod here, and I'm shooting right next to it. So once I'm done shooting, I can just come in here, peek at where I hit, and then I can go back and go again. As we're waiting for my barrel to cool down, I want to touch on a relatively touchy subject, and that is barrel break-in. Some people swear by a barrel break-in that you need to do it. Other people on the other end of the spectrum say that it's complete fad. There's no objective truth that doing a formal break-in process of the barrel actually helps your rifle. In my opinion, I don't think anybody actually knows if there's an objective truth to the barrel break-in process, because once you break in a barrel, how do you know that that broken barrel is shooting better than if you did not do a formal break-in process? Vice versa, right? So it's like you can't test the barrel break-in process at all. So with that said, if your gut instinct says I need to do a formal break-in process of the barrel, feel free to do it. If you say I don't need to do it, then don't do it. This rifle right here, I'm going to completely skip it, because out of the dozen or so rifles that I currently own, 3 of the most accurate rifles that I own right now, I never did a formal break-in process, because that was simply out of ignorance. I did not even know there was such a thing as a barrel break-in process when I bought those rifles. On the flip side, I do have some rifles that shoot very well that I did a formal break-in process with a barrel. On both ends of the spectrum, I've had good luck with both breaking in the barrel and not breaking in the barrel. So in this case, because ammo is extremely expensive, I mean, this right here was like $500–600. Ammo is expensive, so I'm not going to waste my time and money doing a formal break-in process, because if this rifle is a shooter, which I hope it is, we won't have to utilize that. But again, that's my opinion. You're more than welcome to do it however you want. We have a lot of ammo to run through today, which I don't know if I'm going to have time. So 7 different loads, and with this rifle, because the rifle has a heavier contour barrel, instead of doing 3-shot groups, I'm going to do 5-shot groups, and I'm going to do 2 sets of 5-shot groups for everything. So the nozzler E-tip is going to get 2 5-shot groups. The Federal Premium shooting the Barnes TSX is going to get 2 5-shot groups, and so on with the Sig Sauer, so on with the Barnes TTSX, the LRX, the CX, and the Federal Trophy Copper. As we're testing this, we're also going to test the feeding reliability. So I'm going to put 3 rounds in here, and this is a floor plate instead of a magazine, so it's been a while since I've used one of these, and I don't know why it's not seating properly. There we go. Does it feed? Yes, it does. All right, here we go. Starting out with the Sig Sauer and 5-shot group, and then we're gonna run through all the other ones. We gotta go because we're running out of light. I spent the past 6 hours shooting this rifle. We shot about 85 to 90 rounds in the past 6 hours. And I am so happy to say that I think we found our load. So with this rifle, I started with the Sig Sauer HT copper hunting ammunition. And even though I have 3 different analytics here, we're gonna simply focus on the 5-shot overall size group, and we will come back to these 2 bottom ones. So for the first 5-shot group with the Sig Sauer, it was a 2.11 inch group at 100 yards, followed by a 2.40 inch group. Following the Sig Sauer, I went to the Barnes 129 grain LRX, and the first 5-shot group was a 1.59 inch group, followed by a 1.75 inch group. Next, we went to the Barnes TTSX 130 grain, and the first 5-shot group was about a 3.01 inch group, followed by a 2.62 inch group. So clearly, just did not like the TTSX. Next, we went to the Federal Premium loading the Barnes TSX bullet. The first 5-shot group was a 1.52 inch, followed by a 1.24 inch group. Next, we went to the Federal Trophy Copper, and the first group was a 3.77 inch group, which it shot so far off my point of aim that for the second time, to ensure that I was able to record all of the shots, I shot this second group on a different box, in which that's what this is right here. So this is my second group with the Federal Trophy Copper, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a 2.28 inch group at 100 yards with a Trophy Copper. Did not like it. Next, we went to the Hornady CX bullet. Do not mind these 3 shots. These were the ones that I was sighting in at the beginning of my process with the Federal Power Shock. So these are actually the group with the CX. So for the first group with the CX, it shot a 2.70 inch group at 100 yards, followed by a 2.69 inch group at 100 yards. And then last, we have the Nosler E-tip, and the first group with the E-tip shot a 3.02 inch group, and then the second E-tip group was a 2.41 inch group. Had to throw my hood on because the mosquitoes are relentless. But if you take a look at the data that we just went through, there was not a single 5-shot group that was sub MOA. And so it kind of begs the question, does this rifle really shoot, or are we perhaps looking at it from the wrong perspective? Anyway, let's take a look at the chart or the data, and we'll go from there. If we take a look, we did a group 1 and a group 2 5-shot group with each of these loads, and so we averaged them out. So this is now sorted from the worst shooting groups based on the average of the 2 5-shot groups, and then to the best ones. So the worst one was the Federal Premium Trophy Copper 130 grain, and it averaged a group size of 3.03 inches, followed by a Barnes 130 grain TTSX at 2.82 inches, followed by the Hornady CX at 2.70, followed by the Nosler 130 grain E-tip at 2.56 inches, and then the Sig Sauer 130 grain HT at 2.26 inches, followed by the Barnes 129 grain LRX at 1.67, and then rounding out and topping them all was the Federal Premium 130 grain TSX at 1.38 inches. So if we looked at that data, we can clearly see that there was not a single 5-shot group that shot sub MOA. So it kind of begs the question, is this rifle not a good shooter, or am I just a bad shooter? Or would our consensus of how this rifle shoot be different if instead of doing a 5-shot group, we just looked at the first 3-shot groups, and then one step farther, instead of looking at the overall 5-shot groups or the first 3-shot groups, just also looking at the best 3 shots. So I went ahead and I broke down the data even more. So the first one that we're gonna look at is if we eliminated the 4th and 5th shot on all of the groups and simply paid attention to the first 3-shot groups, in the event that we just pretended that we just did a 3-shot group rather than a full 5-shot group. So if we looked at the first 3 shots of all of the groups, this is the data that we get. And you can now see that the Federal Premium TSX 130 grains and the Barnes 129 grain LRX they're both averaging sub-MOA at 0.96 inches and 0.80 inches respectively. So with that, the significance is, well, we would consider this gun at least to have 2 sub-MOA groups averaged if we just did a 3-shot group rather than a 5-shot group. So let's go one step even farther and let's just look at the 3 best groups in no particular order, just whichever 3 were the tightest, were the smallest groups that we got from each load. So we can see that the Barnes TTSX is still over 1 MOA, even with the best 3 shots at 1.65. The Nosler E-tip is at 1.17. The Hornady CX is at 1.16. The Sig Sauer follows it at an average of 1.07. And then surprisingly, the Federal 130 grain Trophy Copper gives us an average of 1.03 for the best 3 shots. And then the Barnes 129 grain LRX at a 0.80 because the first group and the second group were both the same exact size. And then the Federal Premium 130 grain TSX topping it out at an average of 0.795. And I had to go 1 decimal farther with the Barnes LRX and the TSX because if I went to only 2 decimal places, it will give us the same average of 0.80. So now that we're not looking at it from a one dimension of looking at the overall 5-shot groups, we have a little bit more variety to choose from. And no matter which route you choose, it is pretty evident that these 2 loads right here are the most accurate and the most consistent. So we have the Barnes 129 grain LRX and the Federal Premium loading the Barnes 130 grain TSX bullet. And because the purpose of testing out different loads is to figure out which one load suits the best out of this rifle, we had to crown a champion between these 2. So we went ahead and shot 2 more 5-shot groups in each of these loads, which emptied out the 20 box here and the 20 box here. So let's take a look at that data. So this is now the 3rd 5-shot group for the TSX and the 3rd 5-shot group for the LRX. Don't mind this one up here. This is the Trophy Copper that shot terrible. So the Federal Premium TSX, the 3rd 5-shot group, the 5-shot overall shot a 1.03 inch group, which is our first ever sub-MOA 5-shot group with this particular rifle. If we went to the LRX, it's shooting better than the rest, but it's still right over 1 MOA at 1.22 inches. And again, if we plug in the other analytics, the first 3 shots with the TSX for group number 3 was a 0.36 inch group, which it's also the best 3, so it's also a 0.36. If we looked at the first 3 shots for the LRX, we got 1, 2, 3. It's a 1.05 inch group, but if we looked at the best 3, it's shot 1, 4, and 5, and it gives us 0.47. So clearly with this data, the LRX and the TSX are not only tightening up, but they have been pretty consistently accurate out of my rifle compared to the other ones. So with that said, we're going to move on to one final group with the LRX and the TSX. The 4th and final 5-shot group was a 0.62 inch. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the first 3 shots, if we only counted the first 3 shots, 1, 2, 3, it shot 0.24 inches, which is quarter minute. The best 3, same 3 shots, 1, 2, 3, 0.24. Now the LRX, this is on me. I definitely pulled the last shot. So it's kind of not counting it, but just because we're counting 5 shots, it shot a 3.35 inch group, but that's because I completely pulled this shot. So this one's not really one that would count, but simply because we're doing 5 shots, that's what I did. But just know that that was on me. So instead, like, let's look at the first 3. 1, 2, 3, it shot a 0.97, which the best 3 is also a 1 point or 0.97. So regardless of how you look at it, if you just looked at the first 3, and again, I butchered that one, the LRX and the Barnes TSX have been relatively consistently sub-MOA if we only went to the first 3 shots. So now that we have 4 sets of data to go based off of for the Barnes LRX and the Federal 130 grain TSX, let's crunch all of the numbers and see what we have. So for the first table, this is simply looking at all of the 5 shots for each group. So the Federal Premium TSX first 5-shot group was a 1.52 inch, followed by a 1.24, followed by a 1.03, and then a 0.62, which gives an average of 1.10. The Barnes 129 grain LRX, on the other hand, started off with a 1.59 inch 5-shot group, followed by a 1.75, and then a 1.22, and then a 3.35 because I totally butchered the last shot, which gave it a much more inflated average at 1.98. But again, take it with a grain of salt because I know for a fact I butchered that last shot. But anyway, we're just going based on the data that we have. We're going based off of hard data rather than what ifs. Because that 5-shot group data is kind of obscure because I know for a fact that I messed up on that last shot. Let's just now take a look at the first 3 shots and eliminate the 4th and 5th shot from all of the groups. With that, we start with the Federal TSX. The first group, which would be the first 3-shot group, it starts off at 0.84 inches, followed by a 1.08, followed by a 0.36, and then rounding out at a 0.24 inch group, and then averaging to 0.63 inches. The Barnes 129 grain LRX starts off with a 0.803 shot group, followed by another 0.803 shot group, followed by a 1.05 and then a 0.97, which gives an average of 0.91. So across the board, if we just looked at the first 3 shot groups for both the TSX and the LRX, they're pretty consistently sub-minute. Both of them just had one group each that shot right over 1 MOA, 1.08 and 1.05. And we're talking like, that's barely over 1 minute. The rest have been well under 1 minute. So now let's go to our last category and let's just take the best 3 shots. So the Federal TSX, the best 3 shot groups. The first one, 0.84, followed by 0.75, followed by 0.36, followed by 0.24, giving an average of 0.55. The Barnes LRX starts us off at the best 3 shot group, 0.80, followed by 0.80, followed by 0.47, and then 0.97, which gives us an average of 0.76. Depending on how you want to cherry pick your data and what data you want to go based off of, it's pretty consistent that the LRX and the TSX are the most accurate and the most consistent. The Federal Premium 130 grain TSX is clearly the winner. It's shooting relatively consistent like the LRX, but overall it's shooting tighter groups. So that's what we're going to call the ammunition or the load for the Bergara Wilderness Sierra. So before we go any further, I kind of want to jump in here, kind of like in the future, knowing what I know now. And I recently just got this Athlon Rangecraft, which this is a chronograph. It measures the velocity of your rifle or your bow, depending on what you're shooting. And as consistent as these 2 loads have been, they're not shooting as consistently as I would like in terms of muzzle velocity. So with the Barnes 129 grain LRX, I have seen it shoot as fast as 3,060 feet per second and also as low as 2,980 feet per second in the same box of ammo. So you're telling me that one load here can shoot 3,060 feet per second and then the one right next to it can shoot 2,980 feet per second, which is 80 feet per second slower than the first one? It's going to give you more variability when it comes to not only your group sizes, but definitely when you start reaching out there. I mean, you're talking about almost a 100 feet per second difference from round to round in the same box of ammo. So that's just simply factory ammunition, and you are at the mercy of that. You can't really control it unless you have the components to go ahead and hand load. So across all of these right here, because of how much variability there is from factory loads, and not only factory loads, but from round to round in the same box of ammunition, take that into consideration because it's clearly going to have an impact on how well your rifle is going to group and how well it's going to shoot overall. That is also why it opens the rabbit hole of hand loading. That's why a lot of people, they go so deep into the world of hand loading because they don't want to see an 80 feet per second difference between their loads, right? They want to minimize that. They want it to, in a perfect world, to be shooting the same exact muzzle velocity from shot to shot. That's going to help yield in consistency, which consistency you can also argue is accuracy. The next thing you want to do is you want to check to see if your rifle scope has this mechanism called a zero stop or a zero reset. So if we looked at my scope right now, it is not on zero. You can see how it's the markings off. So this Vortex Razor LHT has a zero stop, which a zero stop is simply a locking mechanism so that when you hit your 100-yard zero on your turret, it prevents you from underdialing, so that you know that when you hit that hard wall, you know you are back to zero. Because with this scope, you can dial multiple revolutions and you might not know if you're on 0 MOA or 15 MOA. So having a zero stop is very crucial, especially when you're shooting at extreme long ranges where you are forced to rotate your elevation turret multiple revolutions. For most hunting distances, you probably won't need to go more than one revolution, if even a revolution in the first place. But having a zero stop just gives you that peace of mind that when you hit that hard back wall, you know you're back at zero. So that's what I went ahead. I re-zeroed my elevation turret to make sure that the zero is on the dot. And then I also did it for the windage. And then now our rifle is ready for the next step. The next step when it comes to starting to shoot extended ranges is figuring out how you actually want to do that, because there's many different ways that you can go about it. For example, one of the more old school ways that you can go about shooting and being accurate out to like 300 yards is having a zero at like 200 to 250 yards. Because if you have a zero at 200 or 250 yards, pretty much anything out to 300 yards, like if you put your aim or your crosshairs in the dead center of that deer's lungs, you're going to kill it within 300 yards. You might be a little low or a little high depending on what range it's at, but you don't have to worry about any dialing. You just know that 300 yards and in, you hold to the middle of the deer's lungs and you're going to hit vitals, which is not bad if that's all you plan to do. But with what I want to do, you know, from time to time, I do like to take my rifles out to the range and shoot steel at 500, 600, 700 yards. And having that mechanism where you're just holding in one spot to shoot out to 300, it kind of starts becoming hard to be able to start shooting at 400 yards or 500 yards because the calculations is just a lot more confusing. So to mitigate that, because I like to shoot from time to time over 400 yards at steel, 500, 600 yards, to me, it is the most simple to calculate if I have a 100-yard zero, meaning that my scope and my rifle and my ammo, when I aim at the cross or the dot at 100 yards, it's going to hit perfect in the bullseye at 100 yards. But with this method of reaching out there, the next step you have to go and do is you have to understand how to actually calculate that. And there's primarily two ways to go about it. You either calculate in MOA or mils. MOA and mils, they're essentially two different equations to help you achieve the same thing, which they're two different ways to calculate your bullet trajectory so that you know what to compensate so that your bullet will hit where your point of aim is in the scope. And there's an awesome video by Ryan Kleckner on YouTube that teaches you how to understand MOA or teaches you how to understand mils. For the vast majority of people in the US, MOA is my personal recommendation because you can kind of just think of MOA as inches. Like the way my brain is wired, I typically think of an object in inches, right? If somebody gives me a box and they said, give me the dimensions of this box, my brain naturally wires to inches. Now, MOA, it's not lingo correct to say that MOA is inches, but again, for beginners, you can just kind of consider MOA as inches. So that's what the scope is. So another thing that you have to take into consideration is you need to figure out, do you want to shoot in mils or MOA? Because if you want to shoot in mils, you got to buy a scope that is made for mils. This scope right here is an MOA scope because that's typically what I like to shoot. So before you even start thinking about reaching out to extended ranges, the first thing that you need to do is go learn what MOA and mils are and learn it and know it. So the next step for me because I understand what MOA is, and I've learned that many years ago, is to get a mock draft of a DOP chart. And a DOP chart, it's an acronym. D.O.P.E stands for data on previous engagements. But in this case, I call it a mock or a rough draft because we haven't actually done previous engagements on it. Like, we haven't trued the data. So how I do this is I go to shooterscalculator.com, and this website will allow you to input various informations about your rifle and the load and whatnot, and it will spit out a chart. And it will give you the rough guesses of how many MOA or how many mils you need to dial at various distances so that you can dial your scope and your scope can properly compensate for your bullet drop at those distances. When it comes to this first step, we don't worry about wind at all because we're just focusing on the elevation, meaning the vertical drop of our bullet. The wind, it's very variable, and the more you get into long range shooting, you will come to just hate the wind. So we're just gonna focus on dialing for elevation. The windage comes in afterwards when you wanna go practice in the wind. So when you go to shooterscalculator.com, you can enter the data for your specific rifle and your specific load. So in this case, enter the name. I simply put in Bergara Wilderness Sierra, 270 Winchester plus the Federal 130 grain TSX. The next one is your drag function, which is also your BC or your ballistics coefficient. Every single bullet has their own BC, and different bullets are using different drag functions. For example, like you have a G1 that is used by some bullets, and some bullets use like a G7. So with this specific bullet that I am shooting, which is the 130 grain TSX out of a 270, the drag or the BC that's provided by Barnes is 0.374. We input that in. The next one is the bullet weight. This is 130 grains, so we input 130. Initial velocity, which is also muzzle velocity, which this is what the chronograph that I brought up earlier was about, like Athlon. It'll measure your muzzle velocity, which it will give you a more accurate muzzle velocity so that you can input into your chart, which will spit out more accurate information. But let's just pretend that I don't have that because some of you might not have it. So we're just gonna use the box velocity that is provided. So according to this box, the muzzle velocity says 3,060 feet per second. So we will just simply put in 3,060 feet per second for the initial velocity. The zero range, we zeroed it at 100 yards, so we put in 100. Sight height, it's basically the center crosshair of your scope to the bore of your barrel, which in this case, I usually just kind of guess. For me, it's about 2 inches with this particular setup, so I'm just gonna put in 2 inches. Shooting angle, wind speed, wind angle, again, we're not gonna worry about that stuff because we're just gonna focus on elevation. That stuff comes in at a later time. Next is chart range, and that is simply how far you want the chart to give you data for, which in this case, I'm just gonna put in 500 because I have no intentions of shooting beyond 500. And then chart step size, I go by 25 yards. This is simply the increments that they're gonna spit out the data for. So if I choose 25, it's gonna go from 100 yards to 125 to 150, 175. If you choose chart step size of 50 yards, then it's gonna go to 100 to 150 to 200 to 250, so on. You get the point. I like to go at 25-yard increments. And then we go to the chart column customization, and I go ahead and I remove elevation mils. I remove windage in inches, MOA, mil, and time, because we remove mils because this is a MOA scope. I don't care what the mils calculations are. And again, I remove all of the windage calculations because we're just focusing on elevation. Now, once you do that, create the graph. It'll spit out a rough draft of your chart. Save that, whether you want to print it or screenshot it. And now you got to go to the range to verify all of the data that the chart just gave you. Now that we have a mock draft, it's time to go to the range. So the first distance that I'm going to start at is 300 yards, which even though we're shooting the Bergara, I'm gonna do an objective test with my Savage 110 Ultralight 6.5 PRC, because this rifle, I've already done all the dirty work on it. This rifle is dialed. This is one of my most accurate and consistent rifles. So if I shoot 300 yards with this rifle and I can't hit that gong, then rest assured that the shooter, in this case, me, is not doing my job. So we're gonna shoot an objective round at 300 yards with my 6.5 PRC. That way, we just know that if the Bergara is shooting off, it's probably because the data that chart has given us is not completely accurate. So on the day that I want to go shoot, I'm dealing with a consistent strong wind of about 10 to 15 mile per hour wind from my left to my right. Keep in mind that we're not calculating for wind. We're just trying to verify our elevation dope chart. So any left and right variability in the shot placements on that gong, it's generally just due to the wind speeding up or slowing down. So with the 6.5 PRC, this scope is in mils. So I dialed up 1 mil on the scope. I held on the left edge of the plate. I shot 300 yards, pretty center to me, which gives me an idea that I'm at least doing my job as a shooter. Back to the Bergara, according to my mock draft dope chart, 300 yards says I need to dial up 3.25 MOA. So I dial up 3.25 MOA on my LHT. I shot 3 times at 3.25 MOA while trying to guess my hold for the wind, and it was clearly hitting low. We don't really care about the windage yet again, because we're just validating our elevation in this process. Since 3.25 MOA was low, I readjusted to 4 MOA and we shot. It was clearly much more center. To confirm that that elevation adjustment is accurate, we shoot a second time, a follow-up shot at 4 MOA, and once again, it's pretty center in terms of elevation, your height. So now we can cross off the 3.25 MOA on the mock draft and put in 4 MOA as the confirmed elevation adjustment with this Bergara rifle and that load and this scope. With that, we move out to 400 yards and I did another objective test with a 6.5 PRC, and it was a tad high, but it was close enough to say that I was at least doing an okay job at shooting. So back to the Bergara, the mock dope chart says 5.81 MOA, but we don't have 5.81 MOA because our scope goes by quarter minute. So the closest we can adjust our scope to is 5.75 or 5 3/4 minute or MOA. So we shoot first, and the first shot hit low and right, which again, the hitting to the right is because we are dealing with a strong wind from the left and I'm not holding enough for windage. The low hit is because we're under dialing and 5.75 MOA is not enough to adjust for this load. So we went up to 7 MOA and I shot, and we still hit off the gong to the right, which tells me that I need to hold more for windage. So now I'm holding 2 MOA to the left from the center target, but I'm still at 7 MOA for elevation. I shoot, it hits center for windage, which means I'm holding the right windage, but it's clearly a little high for elevation. But again, we need to validate that. So I'm shooting a second round at 7 MOA elevation with a 2 MOA hold to the left. And once again, we're kind of right there with our first shot at 7 MOA in terms of elevation. So it tells me that 7 MOA at 400 yards with this rifle is a tad high and we need to come down a little bit. So I went down to 6.25 MOA, which I forgot to film that one, and we were hitting center target in terms of elevation on the gong. Once you confirm that, then you write that down and you cross off all the ones on the mock draft, and then you simply repeat that process for all of the distances that you end up wanting to shoot at. So if you want to shoot out to 500, look at what the mock draft says, start there, it'll give you a good starting point, and if you're shooting low, adjust more. If you're shooting high, adjust low. And you're kind of just going and correcting this mock draft that Shooter's Calculator has given you, and you're truing your data. That's basically the process in a nutshell of how you get your dope chart for your rifle. So for example, my 6.5 PRC, it's already dialed because I've done this process with it already, and I have my dope chart figured out, right? So I have yardages, or I guess it's better this way, but I have yardages over here, and then I have my mil adjustment. So whenever I see a deer at whatever distance, I just simply dial my scope up to that mil. And again, this one right here, the scope is in mil, but my Bergara, it's in MOA. So it's gonna be a little bit different in terms of the calculations when you're looking at the physical number. But that's basically the process of how I prepare my rifle from getting it off the shelf all the way to having it ready to shoot out to 400 yards or so. So that brings us to our conclusion of the Bergara B-14 Wilderness Sierra. This is definitely one of the rifles around the $1,000 price point that has my recommendation. If that's your price point or your budget for just the rifle, not the setup, the rifle itself, this rifle has my recommendation. This is a rifle that you should be taking a look at because, again, quick rundown of the rifle. The stock itself is really rugged, really stiff. You don't have any slop in the stock. It has a nice rubber tacky feel to it so that when you go to shoulder your rifle, it feels nice. It's not going to slip anywhere. It also comes with an adjustable cheek piece so that you have better line of sight when you go to shoulder your rifle. The recoil pad, it's not anything special, but we can overlook it. This has a slightly heavier contour barrel at number 4.5. Comes threaded 5/8 by 24 with the radial muzzle brake, but because it's threaded with a universal thread pitch, 5/8 by 24, then you can remove this, put a side port muzzle brake or suppressor. It allows you to customize your muzzle depending on what you want to shoot. You can even take it off and just shoot with no muzzle brake or suppressor. The next thing is the trigger. For a factory trigger, I think this is one of the best factory triggers that you can get. 2 pounds-ish right out of the box. Really crisp, really clean break. Really just no complaints. I think Bergara / CVA, they kind of have this trigger dialed for a factory trigger. It's definitely one of the nicest factory triggers that I used. The next thing is this bolt. This bolt is very smooth. No issues with the bolt there. My only complaint, not really a complaint, this is just a personal preference, is I wish that this rifle was magazine fed rather than using a hinged floor plate. I just think magazines feed a little bit more reliable, because I do have some hiccups. That is the one thing. With this rifle, sometimes when you go to load ammo into the floor plate, if you don't stack it completely correctly, like, you can kind of have some hiccups on the feeding. But that's not really anything that's always going to happen. It's just something that's occurred enough for me to like kind of keep in the back of my mind. It's something that's there, but I feel like that's just because, I don't know, I feel like that's an issue that I've dealt with when it comes to floor plates, not just this particular rifle. Like all the floor plated rifles that I've used in the past, like they just have, in my opinion, less reliability than just a magazine that you load up and then slap in here and then go on with your way. The last thing, and then obviously for me, one of the biggest deals about a Western big game hunting rifle is the barrel or the action, has to be at least Cerakoted or stainless steel. I don't want a blued barrel, especially if you're coughing up about $1,000, right? If you're looking at extreme budget versions, stainless or Cerakote, I can overlook that. Like it can just be like straight up blued, but that's pretty much it. This rifle, it's proven that it can be just as accurate as any other rifle if you put in the time to develop a hand load for it, or just really fine tune a factory load by going through a lot of it. But it's clearly proven to me that it can be very accurate. So it definitely lives up to the standard that I think Bergara has come to have. Just to wrap it up on this one, topping it with the Vortex Razor LHT 3-15 by 42 MOA scope. This combination right here with the MDT ORYX Bipod, it's gonna run you, I think, just right over 2,000. But this is a rifle where if you just want one rifle to rule it all for the rest of your life, this is a rifle setup that I can vouch for. Love the scope, love the rifle. It's just checked all the boxes for me. Now, with that said, does it warrant the price increase over, say, these two rifles, the Ruger American Gen 2 and the CVA Cascade? So these are about $300-400 cheaper than the Bergara. So one of the questions I asked at the beginning of this video was, is the Bergara Wilderness Sierra worth the extra few $100s over the Ruger American Gen 2 and or the CVA Cascade? For me personally, with my experience with a Ruger American Gen 2, I think that the Bergara warrants the extra money over the Ruger American Gen 2. I think dollar for dollar, the Bergara is better than the Ruger American Gen 2. I don't think I can say the same for the CVA Cascade. Again, that's not to take anything away from the Bergara, but I just think that the CVA Cascade, even 2 years later since I've first bought this rifle is still my number 1 recommendation when people are looking at a budget rifle. So now they've increased the price, but it's still about $300 cheaper than the Bergara Wilderness Sierra. So dollar for dollar, I think the CVA Cascade gives you a better deal. However, I think that I can also justify spending a little bit more money for a Bergara, because the thing about the Bergara and the CVA, I mean, the CVA literally uses a Bergara barrel. They're essentially sister companies, so there's going to be a lot of similarity. It's just that this one's $1,000, this one's about $700 at the time of this recording. The main difference is the Bergara comes with a muzzle brake, the CVA does not, but it does come threaded. They essentially have the same trigger. The stocks feel relatively the same, very rugged, very stiff. and they both have that rubbery, tacky feel to it. The bolt is smoother on the Bergara, but I've never really had any issues with the CVA either. But then the biggest thing that sets them apart is the fact that the Bergara comes with an adjustable cheek piece, which I think does give a little bit of an edge to the Bergara. So these two rifles, they have their place in my life. If you're looking to max out a budget for a rifle at $700, CVA Cascade, you cannot go wrong with it. I did not go wrong with it. This is actually one of my most accurate rifles I own at the moment, and it's just a very standard off-the-shelf rifle. Now, if you can warrant coughing up an extra $300, I do think that the Bergara, you can make a very strong case to upgrade from the CVA to the Wilderness Sierra here. But that's me comparing this rifle, which is in a different class in terms of price point compared to the CVA and the Ruger American. But what about something in the more likes of that price point as the Wilderness Sierra, like a Tikka? Well, we're gonna find out. But that video will come at a later time. I don't have an opinion on the Tikka yet because I have yet to shoot this thing. So with that said, that's my review of the Bergara B-14 Wilderness Sierra chambered in 270. And not only is it my review, but this is also the procedure that I follow more or less when it comes to setting up my hunting rifles. With that said, appreciate you guys watching. See you in the next one.